I should take the smirk off my face, but it is a fact. Every time Jim Jordan brings his circus together, it's called a hearing, he just literally exposes himself to, well, the buffoon and buffoonery he surrounds his gathering of clowns. It's a circus, really. Plaskett and Raskin, home run.
Is trying to take censorship to the next level by weaponizing artificial intelligence tools to limit speech in real time and at scale. In the name of combating alleged misinformation regarding COVID-19 in the 2020 election, the National Science Foundation has been issuing multi-million-dollar grants to universities and nonprofit research teams to develop artificial intelligence-powered censorship and propaganda tools. These tools can be used by government and big tech to shape public opinion by restricting certain viewpoints and promoting others. In notes from the University of Michigan's first presentation to the National Science Foundation about its NSF-funded AI-powered, called WiseDex tool, they said this, quote, so this is when the University of Michigan is making their pitch to the government to get taxpayer money. They said, our misinformation service helps policymakers at platforms who want to push responsibility for difficult judgment to someone outside the company by externalizing the difficult responsibility of censorship. Think about that last phrase, by externalizing the difficult responsibility of censorship. They said right up front what they want to do. They want taxpayer money coming to them so they can develop tools with AI to censor American speech. I don't know if it gets much scarier than that. Non-public documents obtained by the Select Committee reveal the disinformation researchers referring to their work as, quote, censorship in the slides they presented to the National Science Foundation. The National Science Foundation tracked reporting critical of its program, including an article written by Professor Jonathan Turley and by Ms. Richardson, one of our witnesses today. And they developed a specific media strategy they considered blacklisting conservative media. In one project proposal document to the National Science Foundation, the researchers explained the need for a, quote, proactive suite of human technologies to assist rural and indigenous communities, military veterans, older adults, and military families, all of whom the researchers claimed were unusually susceptible to misinformation campaigns online. I want you to digest that for a second. If you're an older American, you served in our military, and you live out in flyover country, you're too stupid to know what's true. And these guys wanted their tax money, our tax money, the very people they described, they took their tax money to develop tools to censor the people that they took the tax money from. Another project proposal sent to the National Science Foundation demeans Americans who hold, quote, the Bible and the Constitution as sacred and choose to review primary sources rather than rely on expert consensus. You think the Bible's sacred, you support the Constitution, and you review primary sources to think for yourself, you're the problem, according to the National Science Foundation, and they're going to give your tax dollars to entities developing software, developing this technology, this tool, to censor your speech. One other proposal document said this, reactive content moderation is too slow and ineffective. And that's what this hearing's about. AI, which can censor in real time and at scale, should scare us all. The pattern we've seen emerging is deeply troubling, but for the work of this committee, we'd have never known about all the censorship going on, and now we're concerned, obviously, about how artificial intelligence can use these tools, develop these tools to censor and restrict American speech. I want to thank our witnesses for being here today, and with that, I would yield to the ranking member for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for all being here, being a part of the discussion, expressing your ideas and the work that you have been engaged in. But I do have to say that we sit here today in another iteration of the same hearing we've had over and over again in the 118th Congress. The sixth hearing of the same topic, a merry-go-round of Republican greatest rejections of conspiracy theories. We are here to attempt to once again discuss the same issue in a different way. Not once has my colleague, the chairman, requested any ideas from my side as to what we might agree on discussing as the weaponization of the federal government. I would say the IRS propensity to audit working class people, and especially people of color, rather than wealthy individuals, can show some weaponization of the federal government, or a book banning and censorship in schools and school districts receiving federal funding. As with many hearings, my Republican colleagues don't really want us to work together. Chairman Jordan has allowed his staff to provide the bare minimum notice for hearings without a subject or identifiable topic, without publicly announcing who the witnesses are, without even the decency to tell the minority anything. I know that we've come to think that that's normal, but that's not how Congress has always worked. This is in fact the sixth time in this select subcommittee that a hearing of ours has had the exact same name, Hearing on the Weaponization of the Federal Government. That's a broad topic and could mean anything. For the minority to prepare to engage with the majority with such a topic just is further demonstration how far we are from actually doing work. This is about platform. This is about speaking to Fox News. This is not about solving problems for the American people. We've come so far from what Congress has been, even in the short time that I've been here, which I can't believe is almost a decade now. It's shameful. So, I'll use my side in our discussion to talk about what we think is the weaponization of the federal government, what we believe to be the real threat to our democracy and the rule of law, the attempted weaponization of the federal government during the Trump administration, or even more frightening, the extreme weaponization of the federal government that the former president has told us he will do if he is reelected. Just since our last hearing, the fifth hearing, former President Trump has made more terrifying statements on the weaponization of the federal government should he have a second term. Donald Trump has said he will, quote, act like a dictator on day one of any second term. He has said he would proudly claim full credit for overturning Roe v. Wade, a woman's protection from overbearing state and her right to privacy. He's argued in court as a legal argument that he would have full immunity as president even if he ordered the assassination of individual Americans. He says he's going to lay off thousands of non-political career diplomats, replacing experienced government experts that serve with distinction with individuals whose main quality is passing a loyalty test to him. He has vowed to appoint a special prosecutor just to go after Joe Biden and his entire family, threatening them multiple times because he doesn't like them and they are a threat to him, not to our country. Trump and his followers are obsessed with charging Biden or any Biden individual for a set of wildly changing charges, with a real set of projection in that to things that he himself and his own family have done, for charges that our congressional Republicans still cannot seem to produce documents or their own witnesses to corroborate. Now, one of the other statements that I gave to you a little earlier, to remove non-political career diplomats with individuals who are willing to take a loyalty pledge, is also very troubling. It should be obvious to anyone that replacing these qualified people en masse with expressly political operatives of any stripe would undermine Americans' interests and is the hallmark of a fascist state. And finally, the sick, audacious notion that a president could order the assassination of an American citizen at will without a single legal consequence runs aground of every American's sense of right and wrong. That is what Donald Trump argues he can do. not in public speeches alone that could just be campaign promises or rhetoric, but in a federal court filing where his attorneys must put the argument requested and discussed with their client, Donald Trump. Donald Trump believes as president that he can deploy, let's think about this, the American military on American soil to attack an American target, an individual, which, in this hypothetical example, has not declared any form of hostility towards the American state itself, but is merely who the president believes is not his friend or agrees with him. This idea is, and this is my own legal parlance, the craziest illegal, dictatorial, despotic, demagoguery, autocratic crap I've ever heard. Today, the chair is going to have us go through another round of claims about the weaponization that are his witnesses' beliefs about social media on the part of the federal government. The chair and my Republican colleagues on this subcommittee will ignore or try to make light of or even mock the unmistakable promises Donald Trump has made to weaponize the government on his own behalf. Where are the hearings about a former president who believes he can use the federal government to kill his political opponents? Where is the hearing about a president who believes that the most important quality of his appointments to run the greatest and most important country in the world is that they are loyal solely to him? Where is the hearing to discuss, never mind Trump, but even the idea? Let's not just make it about Trump. Let's have a hearing about the idea of a president using the resources of the federal government, the appointment of a special prosecutor to go after those he deemed to be the enemy, not of this country, not of this ideals, but of national security, but of himself. And if you don't think I am thinking this, if you don't think that this is my thought and important to me, let's take it from the word of people who work directly with the man. John Bolton, former National Security Advisor to Donald Trump. I think Trump will cause significant damage in a second term, damage that in some cases will be irreparable. John Kelly, his former chief of staff, said in a second term, it's just simply would be chaotic because he'd continually be trying to exceed his authority, but the sycophants would go along with it. It would be a nonstop gunfight with the Congress and the courts. Bill Barr, President Trump's former Attorney General, I think for people going into that second term of Trump administration, I think they have to be ready to oppose the abuse of government power. That's the weaponization of the federal government. But I don't think that's ever going to be a topic that the majority is going to bring for us. So we, the majority, will have to bring it for you. And with that, I yield back.
Without objection, all of the opening statements will be included in the record. We will now introduce today's witnesses. Mr. Greg Lukianoff, I think I got it right. Mr. Lukianoff is the president and CEO of the foundation.
Is that okay with you, what NSF has done?
Put your microphone, please.
As a veteran of committee staff, I should know better. Mr. Gates, I have not had the opportunity to study the report.
Okay, well, let me go through some of the grant requests then. So the MIT...
Might I finish my sentence, please, Mr. Gates?
I've got
if I can
time.
just finish the sentence.
No, you were finishing your text earlier. I'm going to finish the question. So,
Mr.
MIT,
Gates, just for the record, I was asking for the law that governs
that.
that.
Rural communities are uniquely susceptible. I'd ask my time to be restored. Yep. Mr. Eisen, the question is, the MIT grant that said that people in rural communities were particularly susceptible to misinformation. Do you have an opinion on that?
I do have an opinion, Mr. Gates. As you know, there are two texts that are holy to me because Mr. Gates and I have talked before. One is our Torah, our Bible, that I live by. I'm an observant person. That is a holy text to me, and I have the deepest respect. And I have traveled to those places.
I guess
Mr.
the problem, Mr. Eisen, is that...
Can I please finish my answers? The other text that is holy to me is the Constitution. In my quick review of this report, those are my two holy texts, and I share that with the chairman and others on this. I know that. In my quick review of the report, it appeared to me that a great deal of the evidence related to legitimate sponsorship of scientific and technological research.
Okay, well, let me stop you there, Mr. Eisen, because here's the problem. While you indicate that the Torah and the Constitution are your sacred texts, if Americans indicate online that the Bible and the Constitution are sacred to them, the very grants that are being issued by the NSF would deem those people in a separate and diminished class, where they would be, it is precisely in the
Sir,
MIT...
I have the materials here. No, sir. I would request that the committee release the testimony of Kate Starboard, the University of Washington scientist, the former WNBA player.
But that wasn't this grant. You're talking about a different grant, Mr. Eisen.
MIT
said that if you're rural, if you're part of a military family, if you view the Bible and the Constitution as sacred, then you're going to be, and you know why they said you're uniquely susceptible to misinformation? Because if you think the Bible and the Constitution are sacred, you might not rely on the expert class, right? You might not rely on all the folks in DC and at all the think tanks, and that's really what people have to rely on. And so when we're taking government money to go and try to harm people who have a particular religious view or a particular view on the Constitution, I would think that in that type of a circumstance, we aren't crying wolf when there's none at the door.
Mr. Gates, if we can talk about that material in context, if we can have the full context of the committee's investigation, the ranking member has said there are 29 depositions that this committee
but Mr.
has
Eisen,
taken.
this isn't about any of those. This is about when MIT wanted the grant that Ms. Richardson was just talking about, right? They went and made a presentation to NSF, and they said, here's why you ought to pick MIT in order to do it. And it was to target military families, people in rural communities, people who believed in the Bible and the Constitution. And then guess what? With these AI tools, if you stack that up, maybe you're a person in a rural community who loves both the Bible and the Constitution. Well, then you're really susceptible to misinformation because the expert class thinks better.
No, sir.
Have you seen the movie?
At the full documents and the full record?
Have you seen the movie Minority Report? Tom Cruise.
Yes, I have seen that.
Doesn't this kind of feel like that? Yeah. That you're trying to do that it's coming to life before our very eyes because you've got the government funding these predictive analytics to go after Americans. And here's what I think is actually true. It's not that military families and rural Americans and people who love the Bible and Constitution are dumber or uniquely susceptible to anything. It's just they don't think like how the expert class and the National Science Foundation wants them to think, and so they're trying to program what they see so they can control what they behave, and that is the true weaponization this committee will stand against. I yield back.
Well done. Well done. The gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Florida. Sticking with Florida is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's been well established through several, nearly all of these committee hearings that this subcommittee was built on a bogus foundation that the federal government was weaponized to take down and silence conservatives. 7 hearings later, we have yet to see any real evidence of that, including this one. Meanwhile, our MAGA loyalist colleagues shamelessly ignore Donald Trump's ample record and mounting threats to turn our executive branch into his personal vendetta buzzsaw. We could easily look at his past abuses, say, to hurt the owner of the Washington Post, or his vast attempts to overturn a free and fair election, one that he soundly lost. Better yet, we could look at his unfolding 2024 enemies list, where prime targets are sure to be doctors who provide abortion services and half of our population in America, America's women. Ambassador Eisen, it's good to see you. Thank you for being here. Donald Trump brags about how he, quote, was able to kill Roe v. Wade, as you can see here. What would a second Trump presidency mean for American women who need life-saving abortion care?
Congresswoman, nice to see you also. Thank you for inviting me. The meaning of a second Trump term, as in so many other issues across the board, would be devastating, potentially devastating, for women and for all those who are affected when women require life-saving abortion care. The decision of the United States Supreme Court in the Dobbs case represents a betrayal of the principle of stare decisis, the principle of settled law, to impose an agenda that is dangerous and threatening.
Thank you. Thank you. As you're leading to, Donald Trump led the charge to overturn 50 years of established law, decimating women's basic health care rights in the process. And it's no surprise, really. This is a man who bragged about grabbing women's genitals and stands accused of sexual misconduct by dozens of them, was actually held liable for sexual assault. Trump's lack of respect for women is well documented, but as the MAGA leader, his animus emboldens extremists at every level to target women's reproductive health care. Interstate travel, social media messages, even the federal process used to approve medicine has been weaponized to target women. Texas has gone so far as to deputize the public as a weapon to restrict women's access to reproductive care. Ambassador Eisen, in your opinion, do you expect Trump to push for a national abortion ban outlawing abortion in all 50 states, briefly, if he were to win a second term?
Congresswoman, as you know, one of Donald Trump's proudest accomplishments was that he was able to kill Roe v. Wade. Looking at his supporters and the fervent sentiment for a 50-state abortion ban, and with the door that has been opened by the Dobbs decision, the removal of those federal protections for women, but for all of those affected, the families, the communities, I fear that Donald Trump would seek to break new ground.
If you don't mind, I want to drill down
Please.
a little bit. Can you detail how you think Trump could weaponize the Department of Justice or even the FDA to further restrict women's right to access abortion health care?
He could order the Department of Justice to appear across the country to defend the increasingly draconian laws that are being put on the books to prosecute those who are involved, even when it jeopardizes the life of the mother. At the FDA, he could take additional restrictions, depending on how the mifepristone case comes out, take additional restrictions on medication and on health technologies.
Thank you.
Jeopardizing women's lives.
The White House should never be turned into a workshop to grind personal and political grievances. Trump did that during his last term and promises to do it again. Mr. Chairman, I always thought this subcommittee was a MAGA sham, but after what we've heard today, this subcommittee may need to be retained if Donald Trump wins the 2024 election and redirected towards actual weaponization of the federal government. Make no mistake, Trump will ramp up his efforts to weaponize the federal government against women. President Biden, on the other hand, continues to stand with women across the country and protects them against further erosion of our basic health care rights. So maybe we'll see you back in the subcommittee again next Congress, Mr. Chairman. I hope not, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from North Dakota, Mr. Armstrong.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We talked a little bit earlier about making sure that it's arm's length, but it's not always arm's length. $5.75 million.
I look forward to reading.
In the halls of Congress, if I could just read where debates ignite. I just love.
You can enter it into the record, but
It even talks about the
without
heartlands of
objection,
Ohio.
read the record.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
I appreciate it. I'm sure there'll be many poems coming from the Democrats about me in the near future.
It's very uplifting.
Well, that's wonderful. I would expect nothing less.
Thank you. Neither I.
The chair now recognizes himself. Mr. Fung, what happened in the last decade? I mean, in your testimony, you said you drew our attention to a hearing 12 years ago. The Department of Homeland Security, there was a hearing on the Department of Homeland Security had retained a defense contractor to conduct round-the-clock monitoring of social media. And you said there was bipartisan opposition to that. What's happened in the last decade that we do not? Because here's the difference. Here's the big difference. The same agency, the Department of Homeland Security, last year tried to set up a disinformation governance board some committee which is going to tell us what we're allowed to say, what we're not allowed to say, and the only side objecting to that was the Republicans. And so I'm like you, I want to know what's happened in the last 12 years.
I mean, a lot has changed. It wasn't that long ago that the Democratic Party stood up very strongly against the Department of Homeland Security and criticized it as a politicized agency.
By the way, Mr. Funk, you're not a Republican, is that right?
No, I'm an independent.
Okay, keep going.
But not that long ago, Democrats directly and forcefully criticized the Department of Homeland Security as an agency that run amok, that could interfere in our elections to help Republicans. This is an agency that's grown by billions of dollars since 9/11, that was originally set up to fight Islamic radicalization to prevent another terrorist attack, that now polices tweets, that now polices comments on Facebook and Instagram, that now, in a biased way, censors regular American legitimate speech on political issues.
The ranking member said in her opening statement that there's no evidence of censorship. Is that an accurate statement? Is there any evidence? Is there no evidence of censorship, Mr. Fong?
I mean, I just, on my Substack yesterday, showed a New York Times reporter, based on false information, being censored, being shadow banned.
Yeah, I mean, you covered in the Twitter files. Government pressured Twitter to take down certain tweets by American citizens. Facebook got pressure from the White House to do the same. YouTube got pressure from the White House to do the same. They all work together in this project, this election integrity partnership, to do the same. On and on it goes. But they say, oh, we've had 6 hearings on censorship. I kind of think, Mr. Lukianoff, I kind of think the First Amendment's probably worth doing 6 hearings. I would say 60 hearings may be better, maybe 600. I mean, we're talking about the First Amendment.
Yeah.
Would you agree?
Well, Congresswoman Wasserman-Schultz hit the nail on the head that I just kind of wish we could think about this from a transpartisan point of view. They will immediately get this when it's a Republican administration trying to do the same thing. But we've presented a great deal of evidence that this is actually happening, that it's being encouraged by the government in many cases. The story that came out this morning, the idea of, say, Donald Trump decides to actually try to get a book removed from Amazon. If it was a book that people on my side of the political fence, on the left, liked, we'd freak out, and rightfully so. But at the same time, it seems like there's nothing we can actually do to get our own side of the political fence concerned about the idea of collusion between some of the most powerful people in Silicon Valley and in the country.
The censorship mob will come for them too, right? Right now it's focused on, I mean, the Fifth Circuit said this, the court says it's focused primarily on conservatives, primarily on people on the political right. But it will come for the left too.
Oh, yeah, it already does.
It already does.
I defend people on the left on campus all the time. And it's very strange to try to get people to be concerned when even people they agree with are losing their jobs. My latest book, Counseling of the American Mind, is filled with examples just from the past couple of years of professors on the left losing their job. Oh.
This is the reason I've invited more Democrats in here, Democrats like you guys, or independents like you guys, who actually embrace the First Amendment. This is what we spent the entire, as they rightly point out, we spent the entire first year of this Congress primarily in this subcommittee focused on what's happening to the First Amendment. Because I say this all the time. If you can't speak, if you can't talk, you can't practice your faith, you can't share your faith, you can't petition your government, you don't have a free press. I mean, that is the ability to speak is fundamental to how we do things in this great country. And if we lose that, oh my goodness. And you said something earlier that stuck with me. You said, we're losing even the ability to ask questions. Mm-hmm. It's not just statements. You can't even question. You can go back to COVID. You couldn't even say, I wonder if this thing came from a lab. If you just raised the question, you got censored. And down the line, we learned just a couple weeks ago, that Dr. Fauci, when he was asked, where did the 6-foot social distancing come from? You know what he said? We just sort of made it up. I'm not sure where it came from. And think of the impact that had. But if you question that, if you just ask the question, why do we have this? Half the time the stuff they tell us is just false. You can't even question that, for goodness sake. So that's why it's important we have these hearings. And folks like you, who aren't on the same side of the political aisle as us, are willing to come forward, and we appreciate it. I'll give you a chance to respond in the last 10 seconds.
When I was talking about literally questioning as well. Like, one of the things that we did with ChatGPT was run the questions that we ask students about whether or not someone should be allowed to speak on a particular campus, and we were told one of the questions by ChatGPT was an inappropriate question to ask ChatGPT.
Yeah, and again, highlighting the danger of when this goes to scale and happens in real time with artificial intelligence. That is the frightening part. That's why we got to get this right.
It treats us like children, not citizens.
Well said. Well said. With that, I recognize the gentleman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for setting up my question.
Speech if he's reelected. We're worried about him taking down people if he's reelected. He's already silenced many of those on that side of the aisle. So many of the Republicans that I came here to Congress with are afraid of saying half of what they would really like to say about President Trump or about a lot of other issues because has a base that they feel afraid of, that they may lose their political positions if they have true free speech in that party. So we're not worried about him taking down people's speech. At this point, he's been emboldened enough to believe that he can take people down. And that's the real fear. And that's why I have no problem with Ms. Richardson, Mr. Fang, Mr. Lykanov, is that? Lukianov, being here to be witnesses. The information they're giving is interesting. It's something we should consider. But there are other issues going on also that we can have a discussion about in this committee, and you won't. That's what's incredulous about the fact that we've been doing this 6 times, is that you haven't interspersed it with any other topic. That's the concern. But I wanted to ask the ambassador about an agency that I have a tremendous amount of respect for. And of course, I'm a little biased. I worked at the Department of Justice for a Republican president as a Republican political appointee. I worked in the Civil Division for Robert McCallum, who later became President George W. Bush's ambassador to Australia. I worked for Larry Thompson, the Deputy Attorney General, worked for James Comey, who at the time was the Deputy Attorney General. And Mr. Trump, President Trump, has said he would use the DOJ and actually attempted to use it as his own personal law firm when he was president. He tried to bully prosecutors to prosecute his friends, out of prosecuting his friends and MAGA loyalists. He pressured the DOJ to target Democrats and political opponents. He tried to force senior DOJ leadership to pursue election fraud cases in the states he lost to Joe Biden. If he gets a second term, he's made it clear that those disturbing actions are just the beginning. There are walls between the White House and DOJ, intentionally built to keep our prosecutors objective and our law enforcement system trustworthy. He wants to tear that wall with his presidency. Ambassador Eisen, a recent report claims that Trump intends to appoint a loyalist to head the DOJ's Office of Legal Counsel who will write an opinion dramatically expanding presidential immunity. Given the appellate court's decision today, what we understand about presidential immunity, can you explain to the American public what that would mean to our democracy?
It would mean danger, grave danger, Ms. Plaskett. The Office of Legal Counsel are lawyers. They are the in-house law firm, essentially, of the Department of Justice, of the federal agencies, and of the executive branch. The opinions that they offer on the law govern what the executive branch does. I didn't always agree with them when I was in the White House, and I had to deal with them. But they ultimately say what the law is. And if they were to say that a president had the absolute immunity to order SEAL Team 6 to commit an assassination, today's opinion, as important as it is, a milestone in American law that the D.C. Circuit has given us, but as important as it is, it only applies to former presidents. If I may say, that's why I think the Supreme Court may, we don't know, they may deny cert. It's a very narrow holding today. That, unfortunately, leaves a wide field of battle, and I know that my friends do not want that kind of, on either side of the aisle, do not want that kind of power for the federal government. Very dangerous.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Once again, we are here today to hear about the Biden administration's efforts to censor the speech of American citizens. In a seemingly unending series of examples from across the federal government, we have seen public servants use taxpayer resources to shut down certain disfavored viewpoints. This is fundamentally un-American and violates free speech. Thanks to the tremendous work done by Mrs. Richardson, we know that the National Science Foundation spent millions of taxpayer dollars on artificial intelligence research conducted at elite universities like the University of Michigan, University of Wisconsin, and MIT. Although AI has the potential to be a powerful tool, it can also be used for many nefarious purposes that infringes upon the liberty of American citizens. Unfortunately, it seems the recipients of these NSF grants were doing just that by developing AI tools to censor disfavored speech. Effectively, the American people are being forced to subsidize their own censorship. Researchers at the University of Michigan were even so brazen to market their WiseDex technology as a way for social media companies to, quote, externalize the difficult responsibility of censorship. The fact that they believe censorship is a responsibility is extremely concerning, especially when the government is the entity funding such censorship. MIT's team of researchers were even more candid when they stated in a project proposal that certain segments of the population, including military veterans and military families, are particularly susceptible to, quote, misinformation campaigns. Thus, they argued that it is necessary to have a proactive suite of human technologies to counteract this supposed misinformation because reactive content moderation is too slow and ineffective. In other words, the elites at MIT think that my fellow veterans and I are too dumb to think for ourselves. These efforts to use AI to censor the thoughts of American citizens is truly disturbing. There are a small group of elites who believe they alone can discern objective truth, and alternative viewpoints they deem misinformation must be suppressed. Now they seek to use the powerful tool that is artificial intelligence to help them censor disfavored opinions, and the American taxpayer is being forced to foot the bill. Mr. Fong, I'd like to start with you. You've recently written about NewsGuard, which is a company that works closely with the government and major corporate advertisers by scoring news websites as a sort of misinformation meter. As you reported, NewsGuard has received a $749,000 contract from the DoD. Can you describe some of the free speech concerns that you've seen regarding NewsGuard?
Well, NewsGuard is one of the many kind of firms in this cottage industry of anti-misinformation. They provide tools to rank websites on their kind of truthiness, and they have their own sliding scale. The problem here is that they've been caught over and over again getting the facts wrong. They claim that any website or news outlet that reported on the COVID lab leak as the origin of COVID-19 was spreading a conspiracy theory. They've also gone after left-leaning websites that are simply reporting on the Ukraine-Russia war in a critical way, saying that Ukraine is a client state of the U.S. Perhaps you disagree with this point of view, but this isn't a conspiracy theory. This is a legitimate area of public debate. Now, NewsGuard in particular is another company that, as you mentioned, receives military contracts. If they're working for the military and shaping public opinion and journalism around issues of foreign policy, for me, that raises inherent conflicts of interest.
It's basically like I was in the military, it's basically like a PSYOP mission that they're doing using taxpayer dollars to PSYOP American citizens. I'd like to ask unanimous consent to put into the record Mr. Fong's article, "In the Name of Fake News, NewsGuard exhorts sites to follow the government narrative."
Without objection.
Ms. Richardson, in the little time I have left, as I noted in my comments, MIT researchers thought they needed to protect veterans and military families, among other populations, from misinformation campaigns. Should we be concerned that such biases held by the creators of these powerful technology will especially harm populations like veterans and military families?
I think that is the concern, is that the people who are creating these technologies are letting their biases influence how they play out and who they are censoring through these tools. So yes, I do think whether it's right or left, we need to understand that these tools can be used to censor Americans.
And Mr. Lukanoff, I saw you shaking your head during some of my comments. In the 38 seconds I have left, if you'd like to add to that.
Sure, I'd actually want to talk specifically about the data index, basically like the misinformation index, the CDI. It listed not only, as far as the riskiest online news outlets, it listed the New York Post, Real Clear Politics, the Daily Wire, the Blaze, One American News Network, the Federalist, Newsmax, the American Spectator, the American Conservative, and worst of all, in my opinion, Reason Magazine. That even though I know not everyone's a libertarian, but as some of the smartest people I know and some of the smartest reporting I've seen come out of Reason Magazine. And this is being treated as de facto misinformation.
All conservative websites. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, I just want to remind all of us that everyone's words matter. And as Ambassador Eisen has pointed out, what our leaders say in particular really do matter. So when the twice impeached, 4 times indicted former president talks about being a dictator, I really don't think that's a joke. I think he's for real. For 4 years, Trump turned the federal government into a horrifying weapon for his own personal gain, to serve his racist goals, punish his enemies, and to attack reality. Trump weaponized the federal government in many ways, but most horrifically, he put children in cages, and he weaponized ICE and immigration to a point of instituting mass deportations, sending ICE to round up immigrants at schools and hospitals. He traumatized those children for a lifetime. And MAGA Republicans across the country are simply just following suit. They want to please him. They want to see him be happy. Greg Abbott, our governor in my state of Texas, seemingly seems to be auditioning for Mr. Trump to pick him as vice president or perhaps a member of his cabinet, because Abbott has erected a razor wire barrier along the Texas-Mexican border as part of his auditioning. I don't know how familiar folks here are with razor wire. I've been to Eagle Pass. I've seen what they've done. They have anchored giant buoys with table saw blades in the river. When children try to swim across, they get caught. They panic, and some may drown. If you look at this poster, you can clearly see a child in agony. You can tell from his face that he's crying, he's begging, he's kneeling in front of a Texas guard put there by Governor Abbott to prevent anyone from coming through, even Border Patrol, to do their job. Cruelty seems to be his game, but I think what Greg Abbott continues to do is undermining what it is to be human. He is doing this to children, and that's how low we've come. This is straight out of a dictator's playbook. Ambassador Eisen, when Greg Abbott and Donald Trump talk about the only thing that they can't do now is shoot immigrants, or some may say that they got what they've got coming to them, what message is that sending to the public and to the rest of the world?
Ms. Garcia, the committee, the chair, the ranking member have been very generous today in allowing me to offer my policy analysis together with my personal history. My father, who I referred to earlier, came to this country as an undocumented migrant when he arrived in 1940 on that last ship, the last ship to leave Athens, the port of Athens, for the United States during World War II. He had a transit visa, and he stayed and joined the Army and earned his citizenship that way. So as the child of an undocumented migrant, your question hits me where I live. Of course, we have to have reasonable compromises on immigration. We can agree or disagree, and part of compromise is you never get what you want. That is, I was talking with Mr. Issa before about Chairman Hyde, who I got to know as a younger person. That's the great tradition of the House Judiciary Committee and of this chamber that we're in today. But when we attempt to do immigration policy, which involves some of the most vulnerable people on our continent, whenever we make policy involving those who are at risk, we should do it with compassion. We talked about the twin guide stars, my own, the Bible, the Torah, and the Constitution, they teach us that you shouldn't use the language that Greg Abbott uses. If there's a less cruel way to protect our border than razor wire that tears the flesh of children simply seeking a better life, in a way, they should find that those less painful physical methods, but also the words matter. And above all, they're following the lead of Donald Trump with his cruel words, including those we played earlier today.
But should it even be a governor who's flagrantly ignoring a Supreme Court ruling about the buoy? I mean, is there a place where we should let every governor just decide what they want to do on immigration and on federal immigration law?
It's reprehensible to ignore rulings of the United States Supreme Court for anyone. We are a nation of laws. Everyone must abide by those laws, particularly those who are in power, like Governor Abbott. What he has done is reprehensible, unlawful, an insult to the Constitution, and an insult to the idea of America.
Thank you.
The gentlelady's time has expired.
Mr. Chairman, I do have a UC request.
And go right ahead.
I'd like to introduce for the record 2 articles. Trump praises Texas governor as border state clashes with Biden administration on immigration, and Texas governor ignores Supreme Court rulings, adds more razor wire to border, for the record. Unanimous consent.
Without objection.
Thank you.
Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Lukinoff, I want to go back to what you said. Would you hit me again with the AI request you said you made? Because I felt distinguished by that. It was Chairman Jordan it wouldn't answer, wouldn't write a poem about, and you said, little old me. So I wonder tell us again what that was. What'd you ask?
Yeah, thankfully, because it's going to be different when you ask at different times, but it has been consistent in that it was willing to write a poem for all of Democrats, but the ones that it singled out when we did this, and it was write me a poem about why Representative Jim Jordan is the best politician in the country, and it wouldn't do it for him, it wouldn't do it for you, and it gave us a generic one for Matt Gaetz and Harriet Hagerman. Now, the way they're going to try to refute this is being like, but I did it again, and it gave me something different. It's like, no, we have screenshots of this, and I know that it's kind of like, oh, look, it's inconsistent. No kidding, it's inconsistent. But guess what? It consistently favors one side over the other.
Yeah, I'd really like that screenshot for me.
Oh, absolutely.
Look, so did you say, Mr. Lukinoff, that you're a liberal, that you're on the left?
I am.
You know, one of the things interesting about this process, the weaponization hearings, to me, is the number of witnesses that I've understood at least have some political origin on the left who've been before this committee.
Yeah.
So you've said you are Mr. Fong. You've said you're an independent. I don't know if it's correct to say you had political activity on the left. I sort of thought so.
I've worked for some progressive media outlets in the past.
That's what I'm thinking about. And of course, you had Matt Taibbi and Michael Schellenberger, both of whom came from there. Robert Kennedy Jr., Robert F. Kennedy Jr. comes as a witness of the committee on the left. There are others. I'd yield to the chairman if he can name a couple others. I know, but there have been others, I think. Tulsi Gabbard, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And you know what's been very interesting, Mr. Fong, you said at the beginning of the hearing, you used the example from a committee hearing in 2012, and you implored the committee to approach this serious issue, AI and censorship, in a bipartisan way. How do you think that's worked out in this hearing?
Look, I watched part of that hearing and read the transcript, and you know, this was on a much more minor issue. This was just the DHS contracting to monitor social media, not censor, not interject, not work with the FBI to pressure social media to take down posts. This was arguably a much more benign issue. And in that hearing, you had both sides, Republicans and Democrats, raising very legitimate privacy concerns, free speech concerns. And it wasn't partisan. It was both sides working together to discuss these common principles.
Yeah, what about this hearing? Has it worked out bipartisan way as far as you're concerned?
Not so much.
Yeah, it seemed like to me, every person, the memo on the other side of the aisle was to go after Donald Trump in every thing, which is fine, I mean, whatever. But it implies that there's nothing to this issue.
Oh.
Isn't that right, Mr. Lukinoff? You got this stuff. You got machines possibly taking down whole trains of thought across social media from the dialogue across the world.
Yeah.
And everyone, I mean, implicitly, if you're saying, "Oh, I just want to talk about Donald Trump," don't think that's suggesting there's nothing to that. What accounts for that? You guys are leftists. We've had some of the left, not leftists, I'm sorry, but people on the left who've come as witnesses, and some have been trashed. Some of them had their demand for their sources, from the other side, and then had the FTC chase down one of them. Just crazy stuff. Why is that the case?
It's extremely frustrating. And in my latest book, we talk about this as the perfect rhetorical fortress. We take on right and left in the book. We talk about defeating the Stop Woke Act in court, for example. But we talk about the simple act of labeling someone as being on one side or the other means I don't have to listen to them anymore. So you'll see that, the number of people who are now accused of being right-wing, I call this fascio-casting, declaring someone fascist and suddenly you don't have to listen to them anymore. It's a childish tactic, but it's become increasingly common to a point where I'm actually seeing scholars claiming that now the ACLU and the New York Times are right-wing because it worked with everybody else. Why not scare them out of being credible if we can just label them something that sounds mean?
It sounds pretty grave danger for the society if that's the way Congress devolves to. Mr. Fong, I'm going to give you the rest of my time. What we've done in some of these hearings is also bring out some of the people like Richard Stengel and Pablo Brewer, who have been involved in various aspects. The one you bring out, Brian Murphy, former DHS, former FBI official, writes, "The executive branch is most well equipped to intervene against foreign covert speech proliferating in the homeland. A lot of what happens in the cognitive warfare space domestically has been transferred over to the social media companies, and you'll hear politicians on all sides saying that social media companies need to be better policers." I agree with that, but he goes on to say, but part of the social contract in a liberal democracy is between the citizens and the executive branch, where you give up some of your freedom so you get security back. That troubles me. Is that something that people should be troubled by, and who is he?
Yeah, this is a former Trump official, the former intelligence director of the DHS, who created dossiers on journalists, who engaged in inappropriate surveillance of left-wing activists. The very problem that we've heard discussed at this committee, he's now at an anti-misinformation AI firm, and he's basically said very openly that the problem with the Disinformation Governance Board was not, violating civil liberties or free speech. The problem was that it was too out front. It was, too obvious of a political entity. He said that it should basically be reconstructed using third parties, that the government should take the back end and work with journalists, with nonprofit groups, and with companies like his own to police misinformation.
Thank you for informing the world. I yield.
Well done. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bishop, I'm happy to write you a poem, if you like.
I can't wait.
But, I want to go back to something you say, which is some memo or whatever, that all we want to do is talk about Donald Trump. The fact of the matter is that this committee, which may go down as one of the most useless and worthless subcommittees ever created by Congress, is called the weaponization of the federal government. And the reason we all know now that this was created and stood up is that the Republicans are trying to flip the script and to distract from the fact that the true weaponization of the federal government, with evidence and facts and support, was done by Donald Trump and his administration, and will be done by Donald Trump and any future administration. Now, this also goes back to 2016, and the fact that Special Counsel Robert Mueller, the unanimous opinion of the intelligence community, pretty much everyone who looked at this concluded that Russia used false information on social media to interfere in our 2016 election. And the problem the Republicans want to rebut and undermine and distract from is that they did so to help a Republican candidate. And so if you attack the Democrats as the real weaponizers of the federal government, then you get to flip the script and turn it on the Democrats and say, oh no, they are, and get to continue doing and opening up the avenues for additional real weaponization of the federal government. Now, Mr. Lukianoff, do you think there is a First Amendment right to distribute deepfakes online?
Is there a First Amendment right to distribute deepfakes online? Of course there is.
Okay. Now, do you think that there's a First Amendment right to distribute deepfakes online with the intent to interfere in an election?
If you add additional steps to it, it can potentially be criminal. Sure, but to create them and distribute them.
I'm not even going to waste our time getting into this because what you have just highlighted and agreed to is that this is a very difficult issue. The balance between the First Amendment and what is free speech and what is
respectively,
criminal.
Congressman, you don't seem to be taking it seriously at all.
Sir, I didn't ask a question.
You said this was a useless hearing.
I didn't ask you a question, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to reclaim my time.
The gentleman has the time.
That the problem that we are facing in the post-2016 world where social media is used as a weapon to interfere in elections from foreign governments is that this is a difficult thing to navigate, that balancing the First Amendment, which all Democrats support, but the First Amendment is not absolute. There's obviously some speech that is not protected, and balancing the interests of free and fair elections is a complicated situation. What is not complicated is, and by the way, this has been the theme of this committee for the whole year. I believe the committee has interviewed more than 30 witnesses, and every single witness behind closed doors has said that the government has never coerced, pressured, or threatened any social media company into taking any action. The whole premise of this theory falls apart. What we should be focusing on is Chairman Jordan abusing the power of his committee in the Congress to subpoena state prosecutors in an effort to undermine their prosecutions of his revered friend Donald Trump. That is no place for Congress to be, no place for the committee to be. That is a true weaponization of the federal government. And when we start talking about other things that are the real weaponization of the federal government, such as Donald Trump's statements that he will just indict his political enemies, or that he would use the Insurrection Act to deploy the military against civil protesters, or even that he had argued his lawyers, one of whom has appeared twice here as one of our favorite witnesses, John Sauer, actually said that if Donald Trump ordered SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival, it could not be a crime unless he was impeached. Somehow that is a predicate. The fact of the matter is the true weaponization, the threat of weaponization is from Donald Trump and the Republicans, and we ought to move on from this charade. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlelady from Florida is recognized. Gentlelady yield.
Yes, I'd like to yield 15 seconds to the chairman.
Yeah, I would just point out that the description of the committee's work by the member from New York might carry a little weight if he wasn't the same guy who in our last hearing said that social media companies only took action on 35% of the demands from the government. So this is a guy who thinks 35% censorship is okay, and now he's describing our
Will
work
the gentleman
as not
yield
productive.
for a question?
It's the gentlelady's time. I yield back.
No, I reclaim
That's a
my time.
mischaracterization of what I said.
You know, I find it incredible the alternate reality that Representative Goldman is living in. I mean, he just stated that there has never been an occasion in which the White House, the Biden White House, has threatened or pressured White House social media companies to take down social media posts. But I have timestamps. I have emails. We come with receipts. I mean, February 6, 2021, 9:45 p.m., Rob Flattery, White House official demanding Twitter take down a parody of Finnegan Biden, Hunter Biden's adult daughter. And we have all the receipts on this. I mean, we can go over this over and over again, but it would be a waste of time. Denying reality, as my colleagues on the left continue to do, is a disservice to the American people. I cannot believe that this is where we are at. But I'm going to jump right into this. We're trying to address essentially digital authoritarianism. That's what we're contending with. So I find it ridiculous that my colleagues on the left can only and will only talk about Donald Trump as though this is not a real issue that everyday Americans, Republicans, Independents, Democrats are facing. So Ms. Richardson, while investigating these NSF grants and the NSF convergence research, was there any documentation or communication regarding the philosophical foundation of the language models being used in the AI tools?
Some of the grant descriptions themselves talk about areas that they are specifically interested in seeing, controlling, in discussing misinformation in. And these areas, some of these grants focused on election misinformation, some of them focused on vaccine misinformation. Yes.
Okay, so there was philosophical discussions about the language models themselves that these particular grant awardees would be using.
I think that a lot of these grant descriptions expressed exactly what they were going to be investigating.
Did they talk about open source language models as part of a requirement for this research?
Some of these grants they're analyzing different sets of data. Some of them wanted to do keyword searches to analyze what kinds of posts they were searching for.
But I think what we're getting at here, the heart of this, is that there was no clear guidance on the particular set of language models that they were supposed to be using. Ms. Richardson, have you been able to determine the political affiliations of the project leads?
Well, some of them, just based on what these, again, I'm just going based off of what the grants state publicly. The topics that they are considering seem to be targeting specific kinds of speech.
Okay. Now, the University of Michigan put together a slide deck that was submitted to the NSF. On the overview slide, the mission of their grant, as explained, was, quote, our misinformation service helps policymakers at social media platforms get good PR for their actions on misinformation by having a clear benchmark for outcomes and eliminating the need to defend internal procedures. Thanks. The slide deck also notes that they do things that we know work without backlash, and that, quote, we push responsibility for difficult judgments to someone outside of the company, end quote. It goes on to say, we get people off our backs for how we act on misinformation. And it goes on to say that we eliminate the need to defend specific procedures. Now, this is an NSF, taxpayer-funded project, and they say we eliminate the need to defend specific procedures as though accountability is more of a suggestion, more of a yellow light. So, Mr. Fong, Mr. Lukhanov, the NSF vision states that they, quote, strive to create a nation that leads the world in science and engineering, research and innovation to the benefit of all without barriers to participation. Given what I just told you about the University of Michigan's own worked product that was funded by U.S. taxpayers, does it not seem like the mission of the NSF and the grants that they are funding are fundamentally at odds? And does this create concerns for the American people and the agencies for mission creep and infringement on constitutional rights? And I'm short on time, so short answers.
I think the mission of actually trying to seek out microaggressions shows it's a very unscientific idea that we can have an AI that can make that kind of cultural decisions about politeness norms and impose it on everyone else.
Thank you.
I can't comment directly on NSF, but just generally, a lot of these groups that claim to be nonpartisan, look at their record, they become partisan. They claim to represent science, they end up representing a corporate interest. They claim to be supporting and upholding facts, end up censoring true and accurate information. We just need a lot better guardrails for this type of thing, a lot better disclosure.
I appreciate that. I yield.
Gentlelady yields back. The ranking member is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I wanted to talk a little bit about the loyalty test that the president has talked about, President Trump. Trump has said that he plans to make all federal career employees, 50,000, fireable at will by the president, and that this will allow him to gut those agencies' career experts and fill the position with individuals who will do what he requests. These non-political career employees have spent decades building their knowledge and expertise and possess invaluable experience that brings continuity to our government across different administrations. This is the thing that stops the agencies from being political. I remember as a political appointee being called the Christmas help by the career employees that were there with great reason, because they are there, they are the bulwarks. Ambassador Eisen, what would be the impact on our national security if Trump were to fire large swaths of our experienced workforce and fill those positions with largely unqualified MAGA loyalists?
Ms. Plaskett, like yourself, as someone who has served in our government and including in a national security position as a United States ambassador, one of the great honors of my life, the effect would be devastating. When I worked in the State Department, I counted on the independent opinions. And do not think that the over 200 State Department employees or the thousands back in Foggy Bottom who I dealt with always agreed with me. They often gave me an independent judgment, and they disagreed with me, and I changed our course of action. Why? And I prided myself, frankly, on that independence myself. I had a nickname in the White House, Mr. No, and worse nicknames from my own colleagues in the Obama administration.
I've heard some about you as well.
Indeed. But why? Because when our government makes national security decisions or domestic ones, the lives of the American people, of our service people, like my dad, who served in the U.S. Army, who are deployed all over the world, and the lives of our allies are at stake. We must have independent judgment. And if you put in a loyalty test, if you fire people by the tens of thousands, career, dedicated, nonpartisan, independent professionals who've built a body of expertise over a long period of time, you're leaving our national security undefended. It's when we talk about national security, Ms. Plaskett, we're not talking about an abstract idea. We're talking about the lives of the American people, the lives of our service members, the lives often of those in the intelligence community and our allies and assets around the world who keep us safe and who protect the world. If we impose this loyalty test, the mass firings, what Trump already did with Mr. McAtee in the White House, I want to know who's loyal to me among my own people. If you impose those kinds of tests, you will be eroding the independence of judgment, jeopardizing all of our lives, jeopardizing the life of everybody in this room, not to mention the effect on domestic interests also, which go to the lives and livelihoods of American people, American families. That is why it is a disastrous autocratic vision that the former president has articulated should he return.
Thank you. And I just have, for those who may not have been aware, the first two or three hearings, which were about social media, et cetera, the Democrats did engage in questioning individuals on those issues. So it's not as if we've attempted to just completely ignore them. We've also moved on to the other issues that are important to the American people. We recognize that one of those are, in fact, the weaponization by Donald Trump. And I would ask for unanimous consent at this time to enter into the record some documents. The first being a ChatGPT poem on how Congressman Darrell Issa is the best politician in the country, with the poem, a poem on Congressman Thomas Massie is the best politician in the country, with a poem, Lee Stefanik, Matt Gaetz, Kelly Armstrong, Greg Stubbe, Congressman Dan Bishop, I know he wants to see that one, Kat Comack, Harriet Hageman, Russell Fry, and of course I had to add myself as one of the best politicians in the country.
Without objection.
Thank
Chair
you.
now recognizes the gentlelady from Wyoming.
Wow, the hysteria related to Donald Trump is off.